She lived between luxury and silence, forgotten in a loveless marriage. A chance encounter awakened in her the memory of who she once was. By choosing to leave, she discovered that freedom is worth more than any status. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. And now, our story. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning, as always. Melissa slowly opened her eyes, staring at the high ceiling of the master bedroom in their Upper East Side penthouse in New York City. The soft, dawn light filtered through the beige linen curtains, illuminating the space decorated with an impeccable taste she herself had chosen years ago, back when she still believed this apartment would be a real home. Today, she knew it was nothing more than a well-staged set for a life that never happened. She reached her hand to the left side of the king-size bed. Empty. Always empty. Edward hadn't slept there in almost 3 years. At first, there were specific excuses. A last-minute international call, an urgent report, insomnia caused by stress from the company. Then he simply moved into the guest room at the other end of the hall, claiming his irregular hours disturbed her. Melissa accepted without question. By that point, she had already learned that questioning Edward Thompson was useless. He always had a rational explanation, always won by wearing her down, always turned any request for affection into another business problem to be managed. She got up slowly, feeling the invisible weight she carried every day. She slipped her silk robe over her nightgown and walked barefoot to the panoramic window that took up the entire wall of the bedroom. Down below, New York was waking up. With its characteristic noise, distant horns, the back and forth of doormen in neighboring buildings, the sound of the first cars accelerating on Park Avenue. The entire city was moving, filled with purpose and urgency. Millions of people were starting another day with goals, meetings, work, life. Melissa, however, felt completely still, as if she were living inside a transparent bubble that separated her from the real world. It was like watching life happen through thick glass, able to see everything but unable to touch, to participate, to feel like she was a part of it. Sometimes she wondered if the people down below could see her, or if she had become as invisible as she felt. 32 years old, married for 7. Living in this 4,000-square-foot penthouse, surrounded by Carrara marble, signed works of art, and Italian designer furniture. She had everything most people dreamed of having, and yet she had absolutely nothing that truly mattered. The intercom buzzed, breaking the morning silence. It was Giselle, the housekeeper who came 3 times a week to organize the impeccable space that never seemed truly dirty, because it was never truly lived in. Melissa pressed the button to let her in and headed to the ensuite bathroom, her bare feet making an almost imperceptible sound on the cold marble. She stopped in front of the Venetian mirror above the double white marble sink. The lighting was perfect, designed by a famous architect to avoid creating unwanted shadows. Everything in this home was thought out, calculated, perfect. Except for her. She looked at herself for a long time. Straight brown hair falling over her shoulders, naturally shiny and healthy. Skin still young, well cared for with expensive creams and monthly treatments at a high-end med spa on Madison Avenue. Green eyes that once shone with enthusiasm, hope and love, and now just seemed tired, dull, distant. Beautiful, some people would say. Many would, in fact. She knew that. She received compliments at events, glances in elevators, comments from her mother's friends. But Melissa didn't recognize herself in that reflection. She didn't recognize that perfectly put-together woman, with her straight posture, serene expression, and polite smile always at the ready. She felt like she was looking at a stranger, an actress who had been hired to play Melissa Thompson for the last 7 years, and who now no longer knew how to go back to being just Melissa. Who was Melissa before Edward? She could barely remember. She took a long shower, letting the hot water cascade over her tense shoulders. She closed her eyes and for a moment allowed herself to remember how it all began. She was 25 when she met Edward at a contemporary art exhibit at MoMA. He, 15 years older, was everything she didn't know. Confident, successful, owner of one of the country's largest real estate development firms. He wore tailored suits, a Swiss watch, and spoke with a natural authority that impressed her. Melissa, at the time, lived with her mother in a rented apartment in Queens, worked as an assistant in a small gallery, and dreamed of one day having her own space to promote emerging artists. Edward courted her with an overwhelming intensity. Flowers every day, dinners at restaurants she only knew by name, weekend trips to the Hamptons, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard. He made her feel special, desired, important. He said she was different from all the women he had known, that she had a rare sensitivity, that she brought light into his life. Melissa fell in love not just with Edward, but with the idea of being the woman who would transform a powerful man into someone more human. The marriage proposal came 6 months later, during a dinner on the terrace of the Carlisle Hotel. He knelt with a 3-carat ring, surrounded by candles and red rose petals. Melissa said yes without hesitation. Her mother cried with joy. Her friends congratulated her. Everyone said she had gotten lucky, that she had found a modern-day Prince Charming. The honeymoon was in Santorini, 5 stars, a suite with a private pool. Breakfast served on the balcony overlooking the Aegean Sea. On the 3rd day, Edward received a call about a crisis at one of the company's construction sites. He spent the rest of the trip glued to his phone and laptop, solving problems from 5,000 miles away. Melissa tried to be understanding. After all, she thought, successful men have responsibilities. She could wait. But the waiting never ended. Back in the States, they moved into the penthouse Edward had bought months earlier. Melissa was excited about decorating, choosing every detail with care, imagining parties, dinners with friends, nights of intimacy. But Edward was always busy. Late meetings, trips to DC, endless corporate events. When they were together, he was mentally absent, answering emails on his phone during dinner, taking calls in the middle of conversations. Physical intimacy also began to dwindle. At first, Edward blamed fatigue, stress, business pressure. Melissa tried to be patient, seductive, understanding. She wore beautiful lingerie, prepared romantic dinners, suggested trips just for the two of them. Nothing worked. He always had an excuse. Over time, the excuses weren't even necessary anymore. Sex simply disappeared from their lives, as if it had never existed. It was at a charity gala at the New York Athletic Club that everything became clear. Melissa, wearing a long, navy blue gown, tried to hold Edward's hand as they walked toward their reserved table. He pulled his hand away sharply, looked around to see if anyone had noticed, and whispered coldly, "Melissa, please. Public displays of affection make me uncomfortable. They weaken my image. You need to understand that." She felt as if she had been slapped. There, in the middle of 300 people, sipping French champagne and smiling at acquaintances, Melissa understood the brutal truth. To Edward, she wasn't a wife. She was a piece of decor, a beautiful accessory that enhanced his image, but that had to be kept at a respectable distance, without demanding affection, without bothering him, without being too human. From that night on, Edward officially moved into the other bedroom. He said he needed privacy to work during the night. Melissa didn't argue. She no longer had the energy to fight for scraps of attention. The following years were a succession of identical days. Melissa would wake up alone, have breakfast alone, spend the day managing the house, going to the gym, having lunch with 1 or 2 acquaintances who still called her. At night, Edward would come home late, go straight to his room and lock the door. On weekends, he worked or traveled. When they were together at social events, they kept up the charade. They smiled, made polite conversation, and pretended to be a well-adjusted couple. No one suspected a thing. No one knew that when they returned home, they went to separate rooms like complete strangers. Melissa thought about leaving countless times. But the prenuptial agreement was ruthless. If the marriage ended before 10 years, she would receive only $200,000. A paltry sum compared to Edward's fortune. It wasn't enough to start over, not the way she would need to. And there was something deeper holding her back, the shame of admitting failure. How could she explain to her mother, to her friends, to herself, that she had traded her dreams for an empty life? How could she confess that her Prince Charming was in fact a man incapable of love? So she stayed, locked in that golden cage, dying a little each day. Melissa got out of the shower, wrapped herself in a towel, and went back to the bedroom. She opened the walk-in closet, a space the size of a whole room filled with dresses, shoes, and designer bags, all bought by Edward, or with the no-limit credit card he had given her. Another form of control disguised as generosity. She chose a pair of beige tailored pants and a white silk blouse. Simple, elegant, safe. She combed her hair, applied a nude lipstick, and put on discreet pearl earrings. She looked at herself one more time in the mirror. The woman staring back was flawless, polite, well-behaved. Exactly what Edward wanted her to be. She went down to the kitchen. Giselle had already made fresh coffee, fresh squeezed orange juice, and warm bread. Melissa thanked her with a smile and sat alone at the 10-seat dining table, another huge empty space. She was finishing her coffee when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Amanda, an old colleague from her gallery days. "Hey Mel, long time no see. I got the invite for the charity gala on Friday at the plaza. Are you going to be there? Would be great to see you." Melissa sighed. The gala. Edward had mentioned it in passing a few days ago, that they had an important event on Friday. She, as always, would accompany him, wear an expensive dress, smile at strangers, and pretend everything was fine. Another night of loneliness in a crowd. She replied to Amanda, "I'll be there. It'll be good to see you too. Kisses." She left her phone on the table and looked out the kitchen window. The New York sky was overcast, grey, heavy. It seemed to match her mood. The days leading up to Friday dragged on. Melissa tried to keep busy. She went to the gym, had lunch with her mother at a restaurant at the shops at Columbus Circle, spent hours in a bookstore choosing books she knew. She wouldn't have the concentration to read. Edward was barely home. When he was, they exchanged a few words about trivial matters, the housekeeper, a bill that needed to be paid, the time they would leave for the gala. Nothing of substance, nothing real. On Thursday afternoon, Melissa was in the living room watching TV without paying attention when she felt a strange wave in her stomach. A slight but persistent nausea. She went to the kitchen, drank some cold water, and sat down, waiting for it to pass. The feeling subsided, but a residual discomfort remained. The next day, the nausea returned in the morning. Melissa frowned, puzzled. She hadn't eaten anything different. She wasn't sick. Suddenly, a thought shot through her mind like a lightning bolt. She stood up abruptly, went to the calendar on her phone, and counted the days. Her heart started racing. Her period was late, almost 3 weeks late. Impossible, she thought. She and Edward barely touched. But then she remembered 2 months ago, on a rare and strange night, he had come home drunk after a corporate dinner. He entered her room without warning, without speaking, and they had a mechanical, cold, almost aggressive encounter. He left right after, without a word. Melissa had lain in the dark, feeling used and confused. They had never spoken of it again. Until that moment, she had tried to erase that night from her memory. Her hands were shaking. It couldn't be, not now, not like this. She grabbed her purse, her car keys, and ran out of the penthouse. She took the elevator down, crossed the lobby with a quick nod to the doorman, and got into her car, an imported sedan Edward had bought for her 2 years ago. She drove to the nearest pharmacy, bought 3 different brands of pregnancy tests, and went back home. She locked herself in the master bathroom. With her hands still trembling, she took all 3 tests, one after the other. She waited for the longest minutes of her life, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, staring at her phone without seeing anything. When she finally had the courage to look, the reality was there, undeniable, in 3 clear, positive lines. She was pregnant. Melissa let the tests fall to the marble floor and covered her face with her hands. Tears streamed down uncontrollably. They weren't tears of joy. They were tears of panic, of confusion, of despair. How could she bring a child into this dead marriage? How could she raise a child in a home without love? What would she tell Edward? How would he react? She sat there for almost an hour, trying to process the information, trying to decide what to do. Deep down, a small, scared part of her felt a tiny sliver of irrational hope. Maybe a baby would change everything. Maybe it would make Edward wake up, make him become present, human, loving. Maybe they would finally become a real family. But the rational part, the one that had learned not to expect anything, knew it was an illusion. Edward wouldn't change. A baby wouldn't fix a broken marriage. It would only bring another person into that emotional prison. She stood up, washed her face, hid the tests in the back of a drawer and took a deep breath. She wouldn't tell Edward yet. Not tonight. Not before she decided what she really wanted to do. That evening it was time to get ready for the gala. Melissa opened her closet and chose a long emerald green crepe gown with an elegant open back and a flowing drape, nude heels, a small satin clutch, diamond earrings that had been a wedding gift, soft makeup, hair in loose, natural waves. She looked in the mirror and saw what everyone else would see. A beautiful, well-dressed, flawless woman. Edward knocked on her bedroom door at 8 o'clock sharp. He entered without waiting for a response, already in a perfect black tuxedo. He looked at Melissa with distant approval, like someone appraising a decorative object. "You look fine," he said without emotion. "Let's go, the driver is waiting." They went down together and got into the armored SUV with a uniformed driver. The ride to the hotel was silent. Edward was on his phone answering emails. Melissa looked out the window, watching New York pass in a blur of lights. She discreetly placed a hand on her still flat stomach, feeling the weight of the secret she carried. The Plaza Hotel was stunning. Red carpet, photographers, security, guests arriving in luxury cars. The charity gala was one of the most important events of the year, bringing together business leaders, politicians, artists, and socialites. Edward was a constant presence at these kinds of events. Melissa was, too, always by his side, always silent, always smiling. They entered the grand ballroom decorated with immense floral arrangements, tables set with fine china and crystal chandeliers. An orchestra played classical music live. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and canapes. Edward was immediately approached by acquaintances. Melissa stood beside him, greeting people politely, listening to conversations about business, politics, investments. No one asked her about her life, her interests, her dreams. She was just Edward Thompson's wife, an extension of him, a detail. After half an hour of perfunctory conversations, Melissa murmured to Edward that she was going to the restroom. He didn't even look at her, just nodded, engrossed in a discussion about taxes. She walked slowly across the ballroom, feeling the weight of the dress, the high heels, the charade. She passed the hallway leading to the restrooms, but didn't go in. Instead, she kept walking until she found a quieter corner, near a column decorated with vines and soft lights. She leaned against it, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes for a moment. She felt exhausted. Exhausted from pretending, from smiling, from existing in this lie. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Melissa opened her, eyes startled. A man was standing a few feet away watching her, with an expression she took a second to process. Genuine concern. He wasn't evaluating her dress, her hairstyle, her social standing. He was simply worried if she was okay. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? He must have been about 35, maybe a little younger. Slightly wavy brown hair, not perfectly coiffed like the other men in the room. Thin-rimmed glasses that gave him an intellectual air. A well-groomed but not overly manicured beard. He was wearing a tuxedo but with a less formal air, as if he weren't completely comfortable in this environment of luxury and ostentation. His bow tie was slightly crooked. There was something refreshing about that imperfection. He had kind, warm brown eyes that seemed to really see people, not just categorize them. "I am, thank you," Melissa replied automatically, straightening her posture and activating the mode she had perfected over the years. Polite, distant, inaccessible. "Sorry to bother you," he continued, taking a step back as if to respect her space. "It's just that you looked a little lost, or bored, or maybe both at the same time, which would be perfectly understandable at this kind of event." Melissa let out a short laugh, surprised not only by the observation but by its honesty. No one admitted to being bored at charity events. Everyone pretended to be fascinated, enchanted, deeply committed to the cause, whatever the cause was. "Maybe all three," she admitted, letting a truth slip out before she could censor it. Lost, bored, and completely out of place. He smiled, and the smile was genuine, reaching his eyes and transforming his whole face. I completely get it. I'm not a big fan of these events either. I came because my firm is a sponsor, and you know how it is. Networking, visibility, corporate social responsibility. But I confess, I'd much rather be at home reading a book, watching one of those bad movies you know is bad, but watch anyway, or just staring out the window doing absolutely nothing. Melissa laughed again, this time more genuinely. When was the last time she had truly laughed? Not a polite, social laugh, but a spontaneous one. There was something liberating in his simplicity, in the complete lack of pretense, in the absence of masks. "Your name is Ryan, isn't it?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the initiative. She had learned not to start conversations, to wait, to respond only when asked. "Ryan Miller. You're an architect. I saw your name on the list of sponsors." He looked genuinely surprised and, at the same time, pleased, like a child who had just received an unexpected compliment. "Yes, you know me. I mean, not that I'm well known, but—" "Not personally," Melissa interrupted, feeling strangely at ease. "But I read about your work a few months ago. You designed that community center out in the Bronx, didn't you? I read an article about the project, about how you used sustainable materials and worked with the local community throughout the process. It wasn't just a project imposed from the outside, it was a collective construction." Ryan's eyes literally lit up. It was the reaction of someone who deeply loves what they do and rarely gets the chance to talk about it with people who are genuinely interested. "Exactly," he exclaimed, animated. "Most architects show up in communities and impose a vision, you know, as if they know better than the people themselves what they need. But architecture should be about belonging, about creating spaces that make sense for those who will live in them. Sorry, I'm talking too much. It's just that I don't usually meet people interested in this kind of approach, especially at events like this." "No, please continue," Melissa urged, and she realized she really wanted to hear. "I have a degree in art history. I've always been interested in the relationship between space and society, between art and community. I always dreamed of working with that, promoting independent artists, creating accessible cultural spaces that weren't just for an elite, places where everyone could feel welcome." "And do you work in that now?" Ryan asked, leaning forward slightly, genuinely interested. The question was simple, direct, without malice, but it hit Melissa like a sharp arrow to the chest. She looked away, feeling embarrassment flush her face. How could she explain that she had abandoned all her dreams, that she had traded her identity for a comfortable, empty life, that she was nothing more than the decorative wife of a powerful man? "No," she answered quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't work." There was a brief silence. Melissa braced for judgment, an invasive question, a look of pity or disdain. But Ryan simply nodded, as if he understood that there were territories that shouldn't be entered without permission. "Well," he said softly, with a kindness that made her eyes sting, "it's never too late to start over. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Sometimes we think we're on a definitive path and suddenly realize we can change direction. I myself left a job at a big, high-paying firm 5 years ago to start my own, focused on social projects. Everyone said I was crazy, maybe I am, but I'm a happy, crazy person." Melissa looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She studied that open face, those kind eyes, that smile that expected nothing in return. There was a genuine goodness there, a humanity she hadn't encountered in years. He wasn't trying to impress her with achievements or money. He wasn't evaluating her like an object. He wanted nothing from her. He was just there, being human, offering a real conversation in a sea of falsehood. "What's it like working with community architecture?" she asked, desperately wanting to prolong this moment of real connection, this feeling of being seen as a person and not an accessory. And Ryan lit up in a way that was both professional and deeply personal. He talked about projects in the outer boroughs of New York, about how architecture could transform not just spaces, but entire lives, self-esteem, a sense of belonging. About the importance of creating places that belonged to people, not just for people. He talked about a daycare he had designed in the South Bronx, a community library in East New York, a cultural center he was developing in Brownsville. His eyes shone as he described the smiles on children's faces when they entered a space designed with them in mind for the first time, or the emotion of seniors finally having a dignified place to gather. They talked for 20 minutes, maybe more, about art, architecture, books, movies. Melissa found herself laughing, really laughing, something she hadn't done in months. She felt light, present, alive. That's when a firm hand gripped her arm. "Melissa." Edward's voice was low, but charged with restrained anger. She turned, startled. He was there, his face serious, his eyes fixed on Ryan. "Who's your friend?" Edward asked, his voice dangerously calm. Ryan politely extended his hand. "Ryan Miller, a pleasure. We're sponsors of the event." Edward ignored the outstretched hand. He looked at Melissa with an expression she knew well. Possession. "Melissa, we need to go. We have commitments." "But we just got here," she protested quietly. "Now, Melissa." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The tone was an order, not a request. Melissa felt embarrassment flush her face. She looked at Ryan, mortified. "It was a pleasure meeting you," she said quickly. "The pleasure was all mine," Ryan replied, confused but polite. Edward practically dragged Melissa by the arm, crossing the ballroom toward the exit. She tried to pull away, but he tightened his grip. He only loosened it when they reached the hotel lobby, away from prying eyes. "What was that?" he hissed, his dark eyes burning with anger. "What was what? I was just talking." "Talking?" He spat the word out as if it was something dirty. "You were flirting, in the middle of an event where everyone knows me. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" "Flirting?" Melissa felt her own anger rise. "I don't even know the man, Edward. He was polite. We talked about art. That's it. I don't care. You are my wife. You have to be more careful about the image you project." "My wife." The words echoed in Melissa's head. Possession, property, never a partner, never an equal. "You know what's funny, Edward?" she said, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "You've ignored me for years. You don't touch me, you don't talk to me, you barely look in my direction. But the second someone treats me with kindness, with respect, you become my owner. Why? Are you afraid of losing me or afraid of losing control?" Edward turned pale. For a moment it looked like he was going to explode, but he controlled himself. He took a deep breath, adjusted his jacket, and said with absolute coldness, "We're going home." They got into the car in a sepulchral silence. The ride back was even worse than the ride there. Melissa felt her heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins. For the first time in years she had rebelled. She had spoken the truth. And it hurt. It hurt because she knew nothing would change. When they got home, they each went to their own room without saying goodbye. Melissa locked the door, took off the dress, removed her makeup and lay down on the huge, empty bed. She placed a hand on her stomach and felt the tears fall. She was pregnant with a man who didn't love her. She had met, for a few minutes, someone who treated her like a real human being. And now she was more trapped than ever. But something had changed inside her that night, something small, fragile, but real. A spark of anger, a flicker of dignity. Melissa didn't know what she would do yet, but she knew with absolute certainty that she could no longer go on living like this. Something had to change, and maybe, just maybe, that change had to start with her. Melissa woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't exactly happiness nor relief. It was something more subtle, more unsettling, the sharp awareness that she was alive. For years she had been on autopilot, performing empty rituals, moving through her days without really feeling them. But that morning, lying in the too large bed, with the timid Saturday light filtering through the curtains, she was absolutely present. And that hurt more than the numbness. The argument with Edward the night before had been brief but intense. He had slept in his room, as always. She had heard the sound of his door closing with more force than necessary. Then, silence. The usual silence of that enormous home where two people lived like polite strangers. But it wasn't the argument that occupied Melissa's thoughts. It was the conversation with Ryan. Those 20 minutes that seemed to suspend time, to create a bubble where she could breathe without the weight of her marriage on her back. The ease with which they had talked, the naturalness, the complete absence of social games. He had asked about her, really asked. Not to gather information or follow protocol, but because he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. When was the last time someone had treated her like a whole person, with a history, dreams, opinions? Melissa couldn't remember. With Edward, she was a function, wife, companion, decorative piece. With the few friends she still kept in touch with, the conversations were always superficial, careful, avoiding any topic that might reveal the truth about her marriage. With her mother, she pretended everything was fine, so as not to worry. Her. She was so used to being half of herself that she had forgotten what it was like to be whole. She got up and went to the window. New York, on a Saturday morning, had a different rhythm, slower, almost human. Families heading to the park, couples walking hand in hand, children playing on the playgrounds of neighboring buildings. Life happening. Melissa placed a hand on her still flat stomach and felt the weight of the secret she carried. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The word still seemed unreal, as if it belonged to someone else, to another life. How would she tell Edward? When? Would he be happy? Indifferent? Would he turn it into another responsibility to be managed efficiently? She imagined the scene. Edward receiving the news with the same neutral face he used for business reports, already calculating the costs, the necessary adjustments, maybe even seeing it as a way to consolidate the image of the perfect family he so carefully cultivated. But there was something deeper that troubled her. Did she want this baby? Not in a biological or moral sense, but in an emotional one. Did she want to bring a child into this dead marriage? Into this silent house where love was just an empty word spoken in public? What kind of mother would she be, trapped in this golden cage, fading a little more each day? And then her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Melissa picked it up, expecting some automated message from a bank or an ad. But it was an unknown number. She opened the message, and her heart sped up. "Good morning, Melissa. It's Ryan from last night. I hope you don't mind. I got your contact from the event organizers. I know our conversation was cut short abruptly and I was concerned. I hope everything is okay. If you ever want to talk about art, architecture, or just exchange ideas, it would be a pleasure. No pressure, of course. Just an offer of friendship. Ryan." She read the message 3 times. There was something profoundly respectful in those words. He wasn't flirting, he wasn't being invasive. He was offering something simple and rare, presence without demands, friendship without ulterior motives, or at least that's what it seemed like. Melissa held the phone for long minutes, debating with herself. Was it right to respond? Was it appropriate? Edward would be furious, if he knew. But Edward didn't have to know. And why did she need his permission to have a civilized conversation? Since when did he own her thoughts, her words, her human connections? Before she could second-guess herself, she quickly typed, "Good morning, Ryan. Thank you for the message and for your concern. Everything is fine. It was a pleasure meeting you too. Our conversation was one of the few genuine moments I've had in a long time." She sent it before she could regret it. Then she stared at the screen, her heart beating erratically, like a teenager who had just done something forbidden. How absurd. She was 32, married, pregnant, and she felt guilty for politely responding to a polite message. Ryan's reply came less than a minute later. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. I confess I did too. I was thinking of visiting the contemporary art exhibit at the Whitney this weekend. If you're interested, it would be great to have the company of someone who really understands art, but I completely understand if it's not possible." Melissa looked at the message, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Enthusiasm. A genuine desire to do something. The exhibit at the Whitney. She had read about it, a project by Latin American artists on identity and belonging. She had wanted to see it since it was announced, but she never went to places like that alone anymore. Edward found art exhibits boring, and she had stopped suggesting cultural outings after the first few rejections. Was it possible? To go there, meet Ryan, have a conversation about art. Would it be a betrayal? But a betrayal of what, exactly? Of a marriage that had been a lie for years, of a husband who barely looked at her. She typed, "I love her work. I'll be there tomorrow morning around 10. If you're around, we could exchange thoughts." She sent it. Done. It was set. A meeting in a public space about art with someone who seemed decent. Nothing wrong, nothing to feel guilty about. Just a woman wanting to have an intelligent conversation about something she loved. But her hands were trembling as she put the phone back on the nightstand. The rest of Saturday passed in a strange haze. Melissa tried to occupy herself with mundane things. She organized her closet, answered old emails, flipped through magazines without reading anything. Edward appeared in the living room around noon, dressed to play tennis at the club. He looked at her with an unreadable expression. "I'm going to play tennis with Michael. I'll be back late this afternoon." "Okay," she replied, without looking up from the magazine she was pretending to read. "Melissa?" He hesitated, and that was unusual enough to make her look up. "About last night. I overreacted. I was stressed about work and I took it out on you. I'm sorry." She blinked, surprised. Edward apologizing. That didn't happen. He was always right, always had justifications. Apologies were not part of his vocabulary. "It's okay," she said cautiously. "I understand." He nodded, seemed to want to say something more, but simply left. Melissa stared at the closed door, confused. What was that? Genuine remorse or a strategy? With Edward, she never knew. That night, he came back from the club and did something completely out of character. He suggested they have dinner together. Not out, at some fancy restaurant. Right there, at home. He even called the private chef they used for special occasions and ordered an Italian dinner. Melissa agreed, more out of curiosity than desire. They sat at the dining table at 8 o'clock, with candles lit and red wine. It was almost a parody of romance, a performance of something they had never been. Edward asked questions about her day, about how she was feeling, even about her old friends from college. Superficial questions, but questions nonetheless. Melissa answered politely, still trying to understand the game. Why the sudden effort? Why the attention after years of indifference? It was almost time for dessert when he put his wineglass down and said, with a forced seriousness, "Melissa, I know I haven't been the best husband. I know I'm absent too much, that I let work consume everything. But I want to change that. I want us to reconnect. Maybe we can travel together, spend more time alone, really talk." She gripped her fork tighter than necessary. Those words. How many times had she dreamed of hearing them? How many nights had she lain awake wishing he would say exactly that? And now, when they finally came, they felt hollow. Too late. Too empty. "I would appreciate that," she replied diplomatically, not committing to anything. "Great, I'll arrange something. Maybe a weekend in the Hamptons, or maybe even a longer trip. What do you think?" Sounds nice. But she felt nothing. Not hope, not relief, not even gratitude. Just a huge, growing distance, as if she were watching the scene from outside her own body, seeing an actress named Melissa play the role of a wife in a play that should have ended long ago. "What changed, Edward?" she asked suddenly, putting her fork down and looking directly at him. Seriously. "What changed in you? Why now, after all these years, do you want to spend time with me?" He seemed taken aback, as if the question were absurd. "We're married, Melissa, husband and wife. It's natural to want to spend time together. But you never wanted to before. For 7 years you chose work, meetings, business trips. There was always something more important. I begged. I suggested dinners, trips, even a simple walk in the park. You were always too busy, too tired, too stressed. And suddenly now you have time. What changed?" Edward tensed. She saw his jaw clench, that clear sign that he was losing control of the situation, and Edward hated losing control. Maybe I realized I was neglecting you, he said, choosing his words carefully. That I was focusing too much on work and not enough on our relationship. I'm trying to fix that. Isn't that what you always wanted? It was, but it wasn't anymore. Or at least, not like this. Not as a task on a to-do list. Not because you feel you should, but because you actually want to. There's a difference, Edward, between doing something because you want to and doing it because you think it's expected of you. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He was clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, with this Melissa who no longer accepted scraps of attention without question. "You're being unfair," he said finally, a hint of anger filtering through his controlled voice. "I'm making an effort, doing everything I can, and you're rejecting it before even giving it a chance." "I'm not rejecting it. I'm just trying to understand. What made you want to change? What happened?" And then she saw it, the shift in his gaze, almost imperceptible. The way he picked up his napkin and folded it meticulously, a nervous gesture he rarely showed. And Melissa understood. It wasn't love. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't personal growth or a late awakening. It was pure, simple fear. Fear of losing control. The conversation with Ryan at the gala had been an alarm. Edward had seen someone else treating his wife with attention and respect, and that had ignited not romantic jealousy, but the instinct of possession. She was his acquisition, and he would not allow anyone to take her. Edward was trying to win her back, not because he loved her, but because he couldn't stand the idea of losing her. They were completely different things. "It was because of that man at the gala, wasn't it?" Melissa said quietly, almost to herself. "Ryan, it was because of him that you decided to change." "Don't be ridiculous," Edward replied too quickly, too defensively. "This has nothing to do with some random architect." "Then why are you here, Edward? Having dinner with me, talking about trips, buying flowers? Why now and not 3 years ago when I was still begging for your attention? Why not 5 years ago when I still believed we could be happy together? Why right now after someone treated me like a human being instead of a decorative object?" Edward threw his napkin on the table, standing up abruptly. His eyes were dark with anger, but there was something else there, something she had never seen before. Vulnerability. Real fear. "You are my wife," he said, his voice low but intense. "Mine. 7 years together means something. You can't just throw it all away because some stranger was nice to you at a party." "I'm not throwing anything away, Edward. You did. Years ago. When you decided I was more useful as an accessory than as a partner. When you started sleeping in another room. When you forbade me from touching you in public. You destroyed our marriage all by yourself. I'm just starting to realize that I'm not obligated to live in the ruins you created." They stared at each other for long seconds. The air was thick with years of unsaid grievances, of truths finally spoken, of a marriage dying in real time there in the impeccable dining room of that luxury penthouse. "I'll think about the trip," Melissa said finally, with a calm she didn't feel. "I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes either. I need time to process all of this, to understand what I really want, not what's expected of me." Edward didn't answer. He simply left the room with heavy steps, and Melissa heard his bedroom door slam shut. Not a violent slam, but enough to show his frustration. For her, that sound was almost liberating. For the first time in years, she had said no. She had questioned. She had demanded honesty. She had treated herself with the dignity she deserved. She sat there at the table, the candles still burning, the wine half finished in the glass, the Italian food growing cold on the plates. A scene. That should have been romantic, but had become a battlefield. And strangely, Melissa didn't feel bad. She felt awake. Melissa woke up early, had coffee, and chose a casual but neat outfit. Dark jeans, a white linen blouse, comfortable flats, light makeup, hair down. She looked like a woman going to an art exhibit, nothing more. Edward had already left for a business meeting, even though it was Sunday. Some things never changed. Melissa took her car and drove to the meatpacking district, where the Whitney Museum was located. The modernist building of concrete and glass stood out in the urban landscape, a temple dedicated to contemporary art. She parked underground, took the elevator up, paid for her ticket, and entered the galleries. The exhibition was powerful. Works that engaged with issues of identity, migration, belonging, roots. There were enormous paintings, immersive installations, sculptures that challenged perception. Melissa walked slowly among the pieces, letting herself be absorbed by the visual narratives. That's when she heard the voice behind her. "This one is my favorite. The way she uses red to talk about violence without being literal. It's visceral but poetic at the same time." Melissa turned. Ryan was there, wearing jeans, a grey t-shirt and a casual blazer. The glasses, the gentle smile. He seemed genuinely happy to see her. "Hello," she said, feeling her face warm. "You came." "I said I would," he replied simply. "And so did you. What do you think so far?" And then they began to walk through the exhibition together, stopping in front of each piece, exchanging impressions, debating interpretations. Ryan had a way of seeing art that was both technical and emotional. He talked about composition, light, use of space, but also about what the works made him feel, the memories they evoked, the questions they raised. In front of an installation about migration, made with old suitcases and faded photographs, Ryan was silent for long minutes. Then he whispered, "My grandfather was an Italian immigrant. He arrived in this country when he was 12, with just a cardboard suitcase and a photo of the family he left behind. He died when I was 15, but I remember him telling stories about the crossing, about the fear of never belonging anywhere. I see my grandfather in these suitcases." Melissa looked at him, saw the genuine emotion in his eyes, and felt something stir in her chest. This was it. This vulnerability, this willingness to share not just thoughts but feelings. Edward never spoke like this. He never allowed himself this depth, this exposed humanity. "My mother has stories like that too," Melissa said quietly. "She came from a small town in rural Pennsylvania, arrived in New York alone at 19, living in a boarding house, working as a secretary to pay for her studies. She never talks much about that time, but I know it was hard, that she sacrificed a lot, and sometimes I wonder if I've wasted all her sacrifices by giving up on my own dreams." "You haven't wasted anything," Ryan said with conviction. "Life isn't linear, Melissa. It's full of detours, pauses, new beginnings. What matters is that you're still here. You still have time. You can still choose." She wanted to believe that. She wanted it with an intensity that scared her. They spent almost 2.5 hours at the exhibition. Each piece was a conversation, each room a new emotional territory. Melissa found herself peeling back layers of herself that she had kept buried for years, talking about her own interpretations, her visceral reactions to certain pieces, the connections she made with her own life without revealing too many details, but revealing enough for Ryan to glimpse the woman behind the polished mask. There was an enormous canvas, almost taking up an entire wall, painted in shades of grey and dark blue. It depicted a woman inside a glass box, her hands pressed against the transparent walls, her face a mixture of despair and resignation. The title was simply Aquarium. Melissa stood frozen in front of that image. She felt as if the artist had entered her soul and painted exactly what she was living. Trapped in a life transparent for all to see but that no one truly saw, suffocating in plain sight. "This one is powerful," Ryan commented beside her. "The feeling of being trapped even when there are no visible bars, of screaming without anyone hearing because the glass muffles everything." "Yes," Melissa whispered, feeling tears sting her eyes. "That's exactly it. The worst prison is the one that no one else recognizes as a prison." Ryan looked at her with a gentle intensity. "Are you okay?" "I am," she lied, discreetly wiping her eyes. "It's just that really good art has that power, doesn't it? To pull us out of our comfort zones and force us to look at truths we'd rather ignore." "It really does," he agreed, not pressing. "But sometimes looking at those truths is the first step to changing them." They left that room in silence, a silence heavy with unspoken understanding. Afterward, Ryan suggested getting coffee at the museum's bistro. Melissa hesitated for a second, mentally calculating how long she had been out. if Edward would ask where she was, if she should invent an excuse. But then she decided against it. She was a grown woman. Having coffee with a friend after visiting an exhibition. There was nothing wrong with that, nothing that needed to be hidden or justified. She agreed, and they sat at a table on the covered terrace, overlooking the incessant traffic on Fifth Avenue. It was noon on a Sunday, and the city had that air of a pause, of a breath between one week and the next. The coffee arrived in artisanal ceramic cups. Ryan ordered an almond croissant, Melissa a muffin. Simple, everyday things, but they somehow felt special just by being shared with someone who was truly paying attention. "So," Ryan said after a sip of coffee, idly stirring his sugar, "tell me more about your interest in art. You said you have a degree in art history. What made you choose that field? And don't give me the canned answer you give at parties. Tell me the real one." Melissa smiled, caught off guard by his perception. "How do you know I have a canned answer?" "Because everyone does. We have public versions of our stories and private ones. I'm interested in the private one." She stirred her coffee, organizing the thoughts she usually kept locked away. It had been so long since anyone had really asked about her, about the person behind the polite, socially acceptable answers. "The truth is, art was my salvation," she began slowly, testing the words. "I grew up without much. We weren't poor. But my mum worked a lot and I spent a lot of time alone. When I was about 13, my school organized a trip to the Met. I walked into those huge halls, full of paintings and sculptures, and for the first time in my life, I felt part of something bigger, as if all those works were talking to me across the centuries, telling me that other people had felt what I felt, thought what I thought. I wasn't alone anymore." Ryan listened in absolute silence, completely present, and that total attention was more precious to Melissa than any expensive gift Edward had ever given her. She continued, "So I started visiting museums whenever I could. I read about artists, about movements, about the history behind the works. And I realized that art isn't about decoration or investment. It's about expression, about saying things that words can't reach. It's the pure language of the human soul. And I wanted to be part of that translation process, to help other people connect with art, especially people like me, who come from outside that world and think art isn't for them." "And why did you stop?" Ryan's question was delicate but direct, without judgment, just genuine curiosity. Melissa looked away, watching the movement on the avenue below. Rushed executives even on a Sunday, cyclists enjoying the bike lanes, families strolling. All that life happening while hers was suspended in a decision that seemed impossible to make. "Life happened," she said vaguely, then corrected herself. "No, that's a lie. The truth is I let it happen. I let other things, other people, become more important than my dreams. I thought love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant giving up who I was, and by the time I realized my mistake, I was in so deep I didn't know how to get back." "It's never too late," Ryan repeated, but this time with more urgency. "Seriously, Melissa, I know people who started new careers at 40, 50, 60. My own mother went back to school at 52, got a degree in psychology and opened her own practice. She says those were the best years of her life. What matters isn't when you start, but if you have the courage to start. And you do. I see it in you." "How can you know?" Melissa asked, desperately wanting to believe him. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I see the way you look at the art, as if each piece is a door to another world. I see the passion in your eyes when you talk about art. I see a woman who is asleep, but not dead. And women like that don't stay asleep forever. Eventually, they wake up." Melissa felt tears sting her eyes again. She blinked quickly to hold them back. They talked for another hour, about books they were reading, movies they wanted to see, places in New York they loved. Ryan talked about his childhood upstate, near Syracuse, about how moving to the city had been difficult but transformative, about the decision to give up financial security to follow his values, about the fears he still had, about the doubts that woke him up at 3 in the morning. There was a refreshing honesty in everything he said. He didn't pretend to be perfect, didn't construct a persona. He was just human, vulnerable, real. When they finally said goodbye, it was already noon. Ryan politely extended his hand. "This was really great, Melissa. Thank you for the company and the conversation." She shook his hand and felt its warmth, its firmness. A simple, respectful touch, but one that somehow meant more than years of a touchless marriage. "I really enjoyed it too," she said honestly. "Can we do this again sometime?" "If you want, of course. No pressure." She hesitated, thought of Edward, thought of the consequences, thought of everything that was expected of her. And then she thought of herself, of the woman she was rediscovering inside that body. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that very much." Melissa drove home in a state of euphoria mixed with guilt. Nothing had happened, absolutely nothing inappropriate. But she felt as if she had betrayed something, not Edward, but maybe the persona she had built, the perfect, well-behaved wife who had no desires of her own. In the following days, texting with Ryan became a routine. Good mornings, interesting articles about exhibitions, jokes about architecture and art, sometimes just a comment on something they had discussed. Nothing romantic, nothing out of line. But there was a growing intimacy, a sense of being understood that Melissa hadn't experienced in years, and the more she talked with Ryan, the harder it was to ignore the contrast with Edward. Because Edward, true to his promise, had changed, or was trying to. He came home earlier some days. He asked how her day had been. He suggested dinner out, a movie. He even bought flowers once, expensive red roses from an imported flower shop. But it all felt performative, as if he were following a script for reconciliation, checking items, off a to-do list. The questions were mechanical. The conversations never delved into anything real. He still slept in his room. He still didn't touch her. The flowers wilted in the living room without him ever asking if she had liked them. It was the difference between someone pretending to care and someone who actually cares. Melissa began to see the distinction with painful clarity, and the pregnancy, the secret growing inside her along with the tiny baby. She was almost 2 months along. She had to tell him. She knew she had to. But every time she thought about saying the words to Edward, something stopped her. If she told him, everything would change. He would take control of the situation as he always did. He would choose the doctor, the hospital, plan everything. The pregnancy would cease to be hers and would become his project. And the baby, when it was born, would be another piece on the board, another element of the perfect life he was building to impress the world. Melissa wanted something different. She wanted to be able to feel this pregnancy as her own, to make decisions, to have a voice, to be a mother on her own terms, not on the terms dictated by a controlling husband. But how could she do that without destroying everything? One Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the exhibition, Ryan sent a different kind of message. "Melissa, I know this might seem strange, but I need to tell you something. These last few weeks talking with you have made me realize how rare genuine connections are. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not hitting on you or have any dubious intentions, but I want you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to vent, or just to sit in comfortable silence with, I'm here. No judgments, no expectations, just as a friend." Melissa read the message sitting on her bed, and tears streamed down her face without warning. When was the last time someone had made themselves available like that, without wanting anything in return, without ulterior motives, just offering presence, support, humanity? "Thank you," she typed with trembling fingers. "You have no idea how much that means. Truly." That night, Edward came home excited. He was holding a folder of documents. "Melissa, I have a surprise," he announced, which was rare. "Remember I mentioned a trip? I managed to arrange it. A weekend in the Hamptons at that resort you always wanted to visit. It's all booked. We leave next Friday." She looked at him, at the smile that tried to seem genuine but didn't reach his eyes. Another calculated gesture, another attempt to keep up appearances. "Edward," she began carefully, "do you really want to go on this trip? Or are you doing it because you think you should?" He seemed taken aback by the question. "Of course I want to. We're married, Melissa. We need to spend time together." "Why?" "What do you mean, why?" Why do we need to? You never wanted to before. For years you chose work, meetings, business trips. There was never any time left for me. And suddenly, now you want to spend a romantic weekend together. What changed? Edward tensed. She saw his jaw clench, that sign that he was losing control of the situation. I'm trying, Melissa. I'm genuinely trying to improve our marriage. You can't blame me for past mistakes forever. I'm not blaming you, I'm just trying to understand. What made you want to change now? After so many years. He looked away, and in that averted gaze Melissa saw the truth. It wasn't love, it wasn't remorse, it was fear. Fear of losing control, fear that she was slipping away. The conversation with Ryan at the gala had been an alarm. Edward was trying to win her back not because he loved her, but because he couldn't stand the idea of losing her. I'll think about the trip, she said finally. I'm not saying no, I just need time to process. He didn't like the answer. Melissa saw the frustration flash across his face before he composed himself. Fine, let me know when you decide. And he left the room with heavy steps. Melissa stood there, feeling the weight of all the decisions she had to make. The pregnancy, Edward, Ryan, her future, the life she wanted versus the life she had. She placed a hand on her stomach and whispered softly, "What do I do? What do we do?" But the baby, still too small to be felt, had no answers. It was just there, growing, waiting, trusting that its mother would know the way. Melissa lay down on the bed, picked up her phone, and looked at the messages she had exchanged with Ryan. There was light there, possibility, someone who saw her as a person, not a possession. But there was also Edward, trying in his own twisted way. There were 7 years of history, however painful. There was a baby that would be their child. And there was her, Melissa, lost in the middle of it all, trying to find the courage to choose herself for the first time in her life. The answer, she knew, had to come from within. No one could decide for her, not Edward with his attempts at control, not Ryan with his liberating kindness, not society with its expectations of what a wife should be. She needed to decide who she wanted to be, and then find the strength to become that person, no matter the cost. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that the next day would bring more decisions, more conflicts, more pieces of herself that she would need to gather to finally become whole again. The days following that dinner were filled with a different kind of silence. Not the usual silence of two people with nothing to say to each other, but the charged silence of those who have said too much and now must process the consequences. Edward left early and came home late, avoiding Melissa. She, in turn, filled her days with activities that once seemed impossible. She went to the movies alone, visited used bookstores in the East Village, spent an entire afternoon at the public library just reading. Small acts of independence that were, in fact, great acts of self-recovery. The conversations with Ryan continued, daily messages that became an essential part of her routine. He sent photos of projects he was developing, articles about exhibitions. Around the city, sometimes just a funny observation about something he'd seen on the street. Nothing too deep, nothing that crossed the line of friendship. But there was a growing intimacy in those exchanges, a sense of being known, understood, valued. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, almost 2 weeks after the tense dinner, that Melissa finally gathered the courage for something she had been putting off. She made an appointment with a private OB-GYN, a renowned professional on the Upper East Side. She went alone without telling anyone, not her mother, and certainly not Edward. The doctor was a woman in her early 50s, with grey hair tied in an elegant bun, discreet glasses and a kind but professional gaze. She had the air of someone who had seen it all and judged nothing. Her name was Dr. Bennett, and she had been recommended by a distant acquaintance of Melissa's, who had praised her sensitivity and competence. She asked all the necessary questions: date of last period, symptoms, family medical history, if she was taking any medication. Melissa answered mechanically, trying to maintain her composure. The doctor didn't ask about the father, didn't ask about the relationship, just focused on her health and the babies, and Melissa was grateful for that discretion. When it was time for the ultrasound, the doctor asked her to lie down on the exam table, exposed her still completely flat stomach, applied the cold gel, and slid the transducer over her skin. The screen beside her came to life with those black and white images Melissa had seen in movies, but never imagined seeing in her own life. "There," said the doctor, pointing to a small spot on the screen. "Your baby. At 10 weeks it's about the size of a plum. We can see the head, the body, and here," she zoomed in and turned up the sound, "here is the heart." And then Melissa heard it, a fast, rhythmic, strong sound. Thump, 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 thump. The baby's heart beating at 160 beats per minute. The most beautiful and most terrifying sound she had ever heard in her life. "It's strong," the doctor commented with a smile. "A determined little heart." Tears streamed down Melissa's face before she could control them. They were tears of pure emotion, of fear, of love, of panic, of hope, all mixed in an intensity that almost couldn't fit inside her chest. The doctor gently handed her a box of tissues and continued the exam in respectful silence, giving Melissa the time she needed to process the moment. It wasn't just a concept anymore. It wasn't just a positive line on a pharmacy test. It was life. It was her son, her daughter, her baby, a tiny but complete person growing inside her, blindly trusting that its mother would know how to protect it, care for it, give it a world where it could flourish. But what world could she offer? A destroyed marriage, a home where the parents lived like strangers, a father who had never learned to love. When the ultrasound was over, Melissa sat up on the table while the doctor wiped off the gel and returned to her chair. The doctor printed several images from the ultrasound and handed them to Melissa, who held them as if they were the most precious thing in the world. "Everything is perfect," the doctor said kindly. "The baby is developing very well. The size is appropriate for the gestational age. The heartbeat is excellent. Do you have any questions, any concerns you'd like to share?" Melissa hesitated, then asked quietly, "Is it possible to raise a child alone? I mean, without the father present? Not by choice, but because of circumstances." The doctor looked at her with deep understanding, as if this were a question she heard more often than people imagined. "It's possible," she replied calmly. "Many women raise children alone and do a wonderful job. Is it harder? Yes. It requires more support, more organization, more resilience. But what really matters to a child isn't having two parents physically present. It's having love, security, emotional stability. A present and loving mother is worth much more than two emotionally absent parents. Do you have support, family, friends?" "I have my mother, a few friends, I think, and maybe I'm starting to build a new network." "Then you already have more than many, and remember, situations change, people evolve. You don't have to decide everything right now, just take care of yourself and the baby. The rest, life will take care of." Melissa nodded, feeling some of the weight lift. The doctor prescribed prenatal vitamins, folic acid, iron, and gave detailed instructions on a balanced diet, hydration, and light exercises like walking and prenatal yoga. She asked her to return in a month for another ultrasound and follow-up. She recommended that, if possible, the father participate in future appointments, that it was important to build that bond from the beginning, but didn't insist when she saw Melissa's closed expression. "Anything, any bleeding, severe pain, fever, you call me immediately," the doctor said, handing her a card with her personal cell phone number. "Don't hesitate. I'm here for that." Melissa thanked her, carefully put all the papers, prescriptions, and ultrasound images in her purse, and left with trembling legs and an overflowing heart. She was in the clinic's parking lot inside her car, holding the ultrasound images when her phone rang. It was Edward. She hesitated, then answered. "Melissa, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice unusually urgent. "I'm home. Can you come? It's important." She agreed, tucked the ultrasound papers deep into her purse and drove back to the penthouse. The whole way, her heart was pounding. Did he know? Had someone seen her entering an OB-GYN's office? No, impossible. She had been careful. When she arrived, Edward was waiting for her in the living room, sitting on the white leather sofa, his hands clasped, his expression tense. He stood up when she entered. "About the gala on Friday," he began without preamble. "The Mount Sinai Hospital Charity Gala. It's an important event. A lot of business leaders and politicians will be there. I need you to accompany me." It wasn't an invitation, it was an order disguised as a necessity. Melissa placed her purse on the console table, took off her coat, buying time before she answered. That gala. She had completely forgotten. Another night of fake smiles, empty conversations, pretending to be the perfect wife of the successful businessman. "I'm not going," she said simply. Edward blinked as if he hadn't heard correctly. "What do you mean you're not going?" "Exactly what I said. I'm not going. I don't want to go." "Melissa, this isn't optional. It's an important event for the company, for my image. I need you there." "You need someone there, not necessarily me. Any beautiful, quiet woman would fit the role, wouldn't she? Someone who smiles at the right time, stays silent at the right time, doesn't cause problems. You don't need Melissa, you need the idea of a wife." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, trying to control his growing irritation. "Why are you doing this? Why now, after years of attending every event, do you decide to rebel?" "Because I'm tired, Edward. I'm tired of being an accessory. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of living a life that isn't mine." "Years?" "Yes, it's been years, years where I completely erased myself to fit into your life, your plans, your image. And where did that get me? To an empty house, a dead marriage, a meaningless existence." His voice rose in volume, a rare occurrence. He was losing control of the situation, and that terrified him. "You're being dramatic. You have everything a woman could want. This penthouse, cars, designer clothes, a credit card with no limit. You've never lacked for anything." "I've never lacked for anything material," she corrected, her own voice trembling with restrained anger. "But I've lacked everything else. I've lacked affection, attention, respect, consideration. I've lacked a real husband. I've lacked love, Edward. And no, money doesn't make up for that. Luxury doesn't fill the void of sleeping alone every night. Diamonds don't replace a sincere hug. Nothing you gave me materially compensated for everything you denied me emotionally." Edward was silent, his eyes fixed on her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Anger, frustration, but also something she couldn't quite decipher. Maybe fear, maybe loss. "Are you leaving me?" he asked suddenly, his voice low, almost inaudible. "Is that it? You met that architect and now you're going to leave me. It's not about Ryan, Edward. It's about me. About what I've become living with you. About looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person I see. It's about reclaiming my dignity, my identity, my life. Yes, meeting Ryan showed me that there are people in the world who can treat me with kindness without expecting anything in return, but he's not the one making me want to leave. You are. It's the emptiness you created. It's the prison you built and convinced me was a palace." "What if I change?" he interrupted, desperate now. "For real this time, if I really make an effort, get therapy, work on my problems, can't we try?" "Why, Edward? Why do you want to try now? Why are you afraid of losing me now when you weren't before?" "Because I didn't realize, because I thought you would always be here. Because I was stupid and selfish and because now you see you might lose me," Melissa finished. "It's not love that's moving you, Edward. It's fear of loss. It's a possessive instinct. You don't want me. You want control back. And I can't live like this anymore." There was a long, heavy silence. Melissa felt hot tears stream down her face, but they weren't tears of doubt. They were tears of liberation, of finally speaking the truth that had been choking her for years. "I'm not going to the gala with you," she said finally, wiping her eyes. "Go, alone or take whoever you want. But I'm not pretending anymore." Edward stood there processing, and Melissa saw the exact moment he realized he had lost, that he couldn't convince her, manipulate her, control her. She had crossed an invisible line, and there was no going back. "Fine," he said in an empty voice, "I'll go alone." And he left the room without looking back. Melissa stood there, trembling but standing. She had said no, she had refused. She had put herself first. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. She picked up her phone and, without much thought, texted Ryan. She needed to talk to someone. She needed to be heard by someone who really listened. "Ryan, are you busy? I need to talk." The reply was immediate. "Never too busy for you. Do you want me to come over, or would you rather meet somewhere?" "I'd rather go out. Can we meet at Central Park? I need some air. I'll be there in half an hour, near the lake." Melissa grabbed her purse, changed clothes quickly, putting on a light cotton dress and sneakers. She left the penthouse feeling lighter than she had in years, despite her heart still racing from the argument. The park was busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Families, runners, cyclists, people having picnics, life happening in all its simplicity and beauty. Melissa walked to the lake area and found Ryan sitting on a bench, looking at the water. He stood up as soon as he saw her, his expression concerned. "Did something happen?" "Yes. No. I don't know. I just had a huge fight with my husband." It was the first time she had mentioned Edward directly to Ryan. Until then, she had kept her personal life deliberately vague. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ryan asked gently without pressing. And Melissa talked. She didn't tell him everything, didn't reveal all the sordid details of her dead marriage, but she talked about feeling trapped, about having lost herself, about finally having the courage to say no. She talked about the emptiness of living with someone who never truly saw her. Ryan listened in silence, just listened, and that total attention was what Melissa needed most. When she finished, he was quiet for a few minutes, then said softly, "I know it's not my place to comment on your life or your decisions, but can I tell you something? In the few times we've talked, I've seen more life in you, more spark, more essence than I see in most people I've known for years. You have your own light, Melissa, and no one, not a husband or anyone else, should be allowed to dim it. Whatever you decide to do, whether it's stay or go, make sure it's a decision that lets you shine again." Melissa looked at this man she barely knew, but who, somehow, saw her better than people who had been in her life for years. She felt a wave of gratitude, of affection, of something she couldn't name. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for listening, for not judging, for just being here." "Always," he replied simply. They stayed there for another hour, talking about light things, laughing at silly jokes, just existing next to each other without pressure, without expectations. When Melissa finally said goodbye and went home, she felt different, more whole, more certain. The days leading up to Friday passed in a silent tension. Edward barely spoke to her, closed off in his world of business and shaken control. Melissa, for her part, spent the time organizing her thoughts, making internal decisions, strengthening herself for what she knew was coming. On Friday night, she dressed with special care. Not for Edward, he wasn't even home, but for herself. She chose a long, wine-red dress, elegant but not daring, comfortable heels, striking but not exaggerated makeup. She styled her hair in loose waves, put on the emerald earrings that had been her grandmother's. She looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, liked what she saw. Not Edward's wife, just Melissa. She took her car keys, her small evening bag, and left. She didn't tell Edward she was going, she just went. On her own terms. The ballroom at Mount Sinai was more sumptuous than Melissa remembered. All white and gold decor, impeccably set tables, a live orchestra, a sea of ball gowns and tuxedos. She entered alone, head held high, and felt all eyes turned to her, not because she was with her powerful husband, but because she was herself. Radiant, alive. She scanned the room for Edward and found him near the bar, talking animatedly with other businessmen. He saw her enter and froze for a second. Surprise, confusion, and maybe a little respect. Melissa didn't approach. She simply nodded from a distance and continued into the ballroom. That's when she saw Ryan across the room. He had seen her too and was walking toward her, a genuine smile on his face. "You came," he said, stopping in front of her. "I came. I decided I wasn't going to miss it just because my husband would be here. This event is about charity, about art, about things that matter to me. I'm not giving up on the things that matter to me anymore." "You look beautiful," Ryan said with sincerity. Not just on the outside, you're radiant. Different. I feel different. The orchestra began to play a soft waltz. Ryan extended his hand. May I have this dance? Melissa looked at his outstretched hand, at Ryan, at the ballroom full of people who knew her as Edward's wife. She looked across the room at Edward, who was staring directly at her, his face tense. And then she made a decision. She placed her hand in Ryan's. With pleasure. They went to the center of the floor and began to dance. It was a simple, elegant waltz, but for Melissa, it was a revolution. It was the first time in years she had danced with someone other than Edward. The first time she had allowed another man to hold her in his arms in public. It was a breach of protocol, a social scandal, pure liberation. Ryan was a good dancer, leading with a firm but gentle touch. They danced in silence, but there was an intense communication in that contact, in that synchronized movement. Melissa felt the eyes of the entire gala on them, the whispers, the speculation, and she didn't care. For the first time, she truly didn't care what other people thought. When the music ended, Ryan smiled and said, "Thank you for the dance. It was an honor." The honor was mine. But before they could say more, Edward appeared beside them, his face a mask of controlled rage. "Melissa, I need to talk to you. Now." The voice was low but intense. Melissa looked at Ryan, then at Edward. "Excuse me," Ryan said politely, stepping back. Edward took Melissa's arm, not brutally but firmly, and practically led her out of the ballroom, through corridors until they reached a private terrace area, away from prying eyes. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he exploded as soon as they were alone. "Dancing with that man in front of everyone? Do you have any idea what you just did? The embarrassment you caused?" "I danced, Edward. I just danced, something you never wanted to do with me in 7 years of marriage." "You humiliated me," he shouted, completely losing the control he always so carefully maintained. "In front of clients, partners, acquaintances, everyone saw, everyone is going to talk. And what will they talk about? That your wife danced with another man? That she has her own life? That she's not just an ornament hanging on your arm?" Edward ran his hands through his hair, breathing heavily. And then, to Melissa's complete surprise, his shoulders slumped. The anger gave way to something deeper, desperation, real vulnerability. "Please," he whispered, and there were tears in his eyes. "I can't lose you, Melissa. Not like this. Not now that I'm finally understanding what I did." "Understanding what, Edward?" He turned his back to her, looking out at the city view through the terrace railing. He was silent for long minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken, more human than Melissa had ever heard. "That I'm a coward. That I always have been. My father was a cold, distant man who raised his children as if we were employees of a company. There was never any affection in my house, never any hugs, declarations, nothing that remotely resembled love. And I learned that love is weakness, that showing feelings is losing power, that vulnerability is a fatal flaw." He turned to her, his face wet with tears Melissa never imagined she would see. "I married you because you were everything I wasn't. Light, artistic, emotional, alive. I thought you would save me from myself. But instead of letting you change me, I tried to change you into me. I suffocated you with my coldness, with my fear of feeling, with my inability to be human. And now I'm losing you, and for the first time I'm feeling the fear, the pain, the desperation. And it's horrible and I hate it, and at the same time I know I deserve every second of it." He fell to his knees there on the terrace, his hands covering his face, sobbing like a child. "I love you," he said between sobs. "I always have, but I didn't know how to show it. I didn't know how to be what you needed. And when I realized I was losing you, I panicked. I tried to change, but it was too late. You had already woken up. You had already seen the truth. And the truth is I'm incapable of loving you the way you deserve." Melissa stood there, looking at this man on his knees, crying, finally breaking after years of absolute control. Part of her felt pity, part of her felt anger, but most of her just felt a deep sadness for all that could have been and never was. She knelt in front of him, held his face in her hands, forcing him to look her in the eyes. Edward, I forgive you, she said, her voice firm but gentle. I forgive you for everything, for the lonely nights, for the coldness, for the lack of affection, for making me feel invisible. I forgive you because I understand now that you are also a prisoner of your past, your fears, your inability to allow yourself to be vulnerable. But forgiving you doesn't mean staying. He opened his eyes, hopeful and desperate at the same time. Love can't show up this late and expect to be enough, she continued. You're feeling now, you're waking up now. But I've been begging for this for years. I've been asking, crying, erasing myself in the hope that one day you would see me. And you didn't. You're only seeing me now because I might not be here anymore. And that's not love, Edward. It's attachment. It's fear of loss. It's a wounded ego. But it's not love. Please, he begged, give me a chance. One. Last chance. I'll go to therapy, I'll work on myself, I'll really change this time. I believe you will. I believe this pain will transform you, that you'll learn to connect, to love, to be human. But it won't be with me, Edward. I can't anymore. Staying now would be a lie. It would be accepting crumbs when I've finally understood that I deserve the whole meal. It would be teaching our child that... She stopped, realizing what she had just said. Edward realized it too. His eyes widened. Child, he whispered. You're... pregnant. Yes. I'm 10 weeks pregnant. It's... yours? It was that night you don't even remember when you came home drunk. Edward clutched his chest as if he had been physically struck. He processed the information, and Melissa saw a sequence of emotions flash through his eyes. Shock, joy, panic, despair. Then you're not leaving, he said urgently. You can't. We have a baby. We're a family now. That's exactly why I have to go, Melissa replied softly. Because I don't want our child to grow up thinking this is what a marriage is. That love is coldness disguised as luxury. That it's normal for a mother and father to live like strangers. I want him to grow up seeing that people have the courage to start over, that you don't have to stay in places that destroy you. That true love is choosing yourself, respecting yourself, valuing yourself. But the baby needs a father, he argued, desperate, and he will have one. You will be our child's father. But I don't have to be your wife for that. We can co-parent, we can be civil, we might even be friends one day. But I can't be your wife anymore. That version of me is dead, Edward. And letting her die was the only way I could be reborn. She stood up, extended her hand, and helped him up too. They stood there, face to face, with the illuminated New York City skyline behind them, two people who once dreamed of being happy together, and who now had to have the courage to admit that sometimes happiness means separation. I'm going to see a lawyer on Monday, Melissa said calmly. We'll handle everything fairly and respectfully. I don't want your money, Edward. I just want enough to live with dignity and raise our child. You can see the baby whenever you want. We'll do this right for both of us, for the child. Edward nodded, unable to speak. Melissa leaned in and kissed his forehead, a gesture of affectionate but final farewell. Take care of yourself. Go to therapy for real. Face your demons. One day you'll love someone the right way. It just won't be me. And then she turned and walked off the terrace, leaving Edward there, broken, but perhaps for the first time in his life, completely human. Melissa walked through the corridors back to the ballroom, grabbed her purse and left the gala, without looking back. Outside, the New York night was cool, starry despite the light pollution. She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, feeling free in a way she hadn't in years. Her phone vibrated. It was Ryan. Are you okay? I saw you leave with him and got worried. She smiled and typed, I'm more than okay, I'm free. Can I call you tomorrow? I have a lot to tell you. The reply was immediate. Of course. I'm here. Always. Melissa put her phone away, got in her car, and drove back home for the last time as Edward Thompson's wife. Tomorrow she would begin the process of becoming just Melissa again, and for the first time in 7 years, that prospect wasn't scary. It was filled with hope. The decision was made. There was no turning back. Melissa woke up that Monday morning with a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. The New York light streamed through the window of the guest room where she had been sleeping for the past few weeks, and for the first time, that brightness didn't hurt her eyes. It was different, it was liberating. Edward was still asleep in the master bedroom, or pretending to be. In the last few days, after that night at the gala, after his tears, after the late and desperate confessions, the house had turned into a minefield of heavy silences and furtive glances. He tried to get closer, but his attempts seemed rehearsed, mechanical, as if he were following a reconciliation script someone had handed him. Melissa dressed calmly. She chose a simple, comfortable outfit. She no longer needed the designer clothes, the heavy jewelry, the painful heels. She looked in the mirror and saw a different woman. She was no longer the 25-year-old girl who had accepted the marriage proposal without question. She was no longer the invisible wife who smiled at events while dying inside. She was someone being reborn, still fragile, still scared, but alive. She went downstairs and found Edward in the living room, sitting on the Italian leather sofa with a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked at her with that expression she had learned to recognize in recent days, a mixture of restrained desperation and an attempt at control. It was as if he were constantly calculating what to say, how to act, what strategy to use to keep her there. "Good morning," she said, her calm voice surprising them both. He stood up immediately. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" The question was absurd. Neither of them had slept well in weeks, but Melissa didn't point out the irony. She just nodded and walked to the kitchen. She needed coffee. She needed something to anchor her in that moment, because what she was about to do would require all her courage. Edward followed her. "Melissa, we need to talk." She poured her coffee, smelled the strong, comforting aroma, and finally turned to face him. "I know I need to talk to you too." There was a pause, a silence that seemed to carry the weight of 7 years of a marriage that had never been what it promised. Edward took a deep breath, and Melissa realized he was about to launch into another one of his prepared speeches, but she cut him off before he could start. "Edward, I'm pregnant." The words came out simply, directly, without beating around the bush. She hadn't planned to say it like that, so suddenly, but she felt it was the only way. The raw, unvarnished truth, without drama, without preparation. Just the truth. All the color drained from his face. He stood motionless for a few seconds, processing the information as if it were in a foreign language he needed to translate before understanding. The cup he was holding trembled slightly in his hands. "You're pregnant?" "I am. Almost 3 months." He placed the cup on the counter, and Melissa saw his hands shaking. For a moment, she thought he would collapse, cry again, fall to his knees as he had at the gala. But instead, something different happened. A look of relief washed over his face, as if this news were the salvation he had been waiting for, the anchor that would keep her there, the reason she would have to stay. "Melissa, this changes everything. This means that we—" "No, Edward, this changes nothing." The coldness in her voice paralyzed him. He looked at her, uncomprehending, and Melissa felt a pang of compassion, but not enough to change what needed to be said. "This child is not a bridge between us. It's not an excuse for me to stay. It's not a bargaining chip. This child is my responsibility, and I'm going to take care of it alone." "Alone? Melissa, I'm the father. I have a right—" "You have legal rights, yes, and I won't take that away from you. But I will not use this child to prop up a marriage that died years ago. I will not raise a child in a house where love is faked, where affection is a strategy, where everything is for show." Edward took a step forward, and for the first time, Melissa saw something genuine in his eyes. It was no longer control, no longer calculation. It was real fear. Fear of losing, not of losing. Control, but of truly losing. "I know I messed up, Melissa. I know I was a coward. I know I left you alone when I promised to be by your side. But I'm changing. I've started therapy. I'm facing my demons. I'm trying to be the man you deserved from the beginning." Melissa felt tears burn her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She took a deep breath and held on to the marble countertop. "I believe you're trying, Edward. I really do. But you're 7 years too late. You're showing up with flowers now when the plant has already died. And it's not fair to me, it's not fair to you, and most of all, it's not fair to this child I'm carrying, to pretend we can salvage something that never really existed." But it did. In the beginning, it did. In the beginning, there was an illusion. There was a charm you knew how to use very well. But real love, love that endures, that stays, that chooses every day, that never existed between us, Edward. And it wasn't just your fault. I was a coward, too. I accepted crumbs because I was afraid of being alone, because I was afraid of having nothing, because I thought luxury and security would make up for the lack of affection. But they don't. They never did. Edward ran a hand over his face, and Melissa realized he was finally understanding. There were no more arguments, no more strategies. There was nothing more that could be said or done to change what she had decided. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice low, defeated. "I'm leaving this house. I'm going to rent a small apartment, something that fits my reality, not yours. I'm going to get my life back. I'm going to open that art gallery I always dreamed of. I'm going to raise my child with love, with truth, with dignity. I'm going to start over." "And the prenup?" Melissa smiled, but it wasn't a bitter smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found something more valuable than money. "You can keep everything, Edward. The house, the cars, the art, the stocks, the bank accounts. I just want enough to get by for the first few months until the gallery is up and running. I don't want to fight. I don't want a war. I just want peace." He was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "I will take care of you and our child financially, not because you're asking, but because it's my responsibility. And I will go to therapy. I will keep trying to be a better person. Not for you because I've already lost you, but for me. And maybe one day I can be a decent father to this child." Melissa felt a lump in her throat. For the first time, Edward was speaking like a real human being, not the calculating businessman performing emotions. And that, in some strange and painful way, brought a different kind of closure. "I hope you can, Edward, I really do." They stood there, in the kitchen of that immense empty house, two strangers who had shared a decade of illusions and finally acknowledged the truth. There were no villains in this story, just two people who should never have gotten married, but who now, finally, had the chance to be free. The following days were a mix of relief and chaos. Melissa started looking for apartments. She wanted something simple, cozy, with natural light, in a quiet New York neighborhood. She didn't need huge balconies or private pools. She needed a place that felt like a home, not a showroom. It was during one of these searches that she got a message from Ryan, the architect. He asked how she was, if she needed anything, if he could help in any way. There was no pressure, no ulterior motives, just genuine concern. Melissa hesitated before replying. Part of her still felt guilty, as if being in contact with Ryan were a betrayal, even though she knew her marriage had ended long before she met him. But another part of her, the part that was learning to be honest with herself, knew that Ryan represented something important, the possibility of a true connection. She replied. She told him she was getting separated, that she was looking for a place to live, that she was going to open an art gallery. Ryan offered to help immediately. He said he knew of some available properties, that he could take a look with her, that he had experience with renovations and adapting spaces, not as a man trying to win her over, but as a friend offering support. And so naturally and without rush, they began to meet. They visited apartments, talked about projects, laughed at silly jokes, had coffee at neighborhood cafes. Ryan never asked about Edward, never pushed, never tried to occupy a space that was still being rebuilt inside her. He was simply present. It was Ryan who found the perfect apartment. A two-bedroom place in Chelsea, with large windows that let in the morning sun, hardwood floors that creaked softly underfoot, a small balcony overlooking the tree-lined street. It was modest compared to the mansion where Melissa had lived, but it was infinitely more beautiful because it was hers. When she signed the lease, she felt an emotion she hadn't experienced in years, Pride. Pride in doing this on her own, with her own money, with her own choices. The move was quick. Melissa took almost nothing from Edward's house. Just clothes, some books, personal items that truly had sentimental value. The rest, all that luxury that had once seemed so important, was left behind without regret. Edward helped with the move, silent, respectful. There was a moment as she was leaving for the last time when he called her name. "Melissa." She turned. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love. Thank you for trying. And thank you for having the courage to leave when I didn't have the courage to set you free." She nodded, feeling the tears finally fall. They weren't tears of regret, but of closure, of mourning for something that could have been and never was. "Take care of yourself, Edward. You too." And then she left, for the last time, and she didn't look back. The following months were about rebuilding. Melissa dedicated herself to the gallery project with an intensity that surprised even herself. Ryan helped with the architectural design, transforming an abandoned commercial space in the East Village into a warm and sophisticated environment. It wasn't big, it wasn't luxurious, but it had soul. Melissa's belly began to grow, and with it, a strange sense of fullness. She talked to the baby every night, told it about her plans, about the gallery, about the future they were building together. She wasn't afraid. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. Ryan was always around, but never invasive. He went with her to prenatal appointments when she asked for company, helped, assembled the baby's crib in the apartment, brought her books on pregnancy that she never asked for, but were always useful. They never defined what they were to each other. They didn't need to. Something was growing there, but it was something that wasn't in a hurry, that didn't need labels. One afternoon, as they were arranging the first pieces to be exhibited in the gallery, Melissa asked something that had been on her mind for weeks. "Ryan, why are you doing all this?" He stopped hanging a painting and looked at her with those kind eyes that had made her feel seen for the first time at that gala months ago. "Because I like you, Melissa. I like the person you are, the person you're becoming, and I'm in no rush. I don't need you to be anything other than what you are right now. I'm here because I want to be, not because I expect something in return." Melissa felt her heart tighten, but not with pain. It was something different. It was gratitude. It was hope. "I don't know if I'm ready for a relationship, Ryan. I'm still finding myself. I'm still learning who I am without being someone's wife. I know, and that's okay. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be honest with me and with yourself. And when the time comes, if it comes, we'll talk. No rush." He smiled, and Melissa smiled back, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. The gallery's opening was set for a Friday in September. Melissa was 7 months pregnant, huge, radiant, anxious. She invited young artists, many from the outer boroughs of New York, people whose voices were often silenced, whose stories were rarely told. The gallery wouldn't just be an art space, but a space of resistance, of memory, of voices that needed to be heard. On the opening night, the space was packed. Friends, artists, critics, curious onlookers. Melissa wore a simple dress that accommodated her belly, her hair down, no expensive jewelry, no heavy makeup. It was her. Finally. Ryan was by her side, not as an official partner, but as a friend, a support, a presence. And Melissa felt complete, not because she had someone by her side, but because she had herself back. In the middle of the night, she saw a familiar figure enter the gallery. Edward. He looked different, thinner, his face less tense, his eyes less calculating. He was wearing casual clothes, something she had never seen him wear in public. He walked toward her carefully, as if asking for permission to be there. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi, Edward. It's beautiful here. You did it. You did what you always wanted to do." Melissa smiled. "Thank you. What are you doing here?" He held out an envelope. "I wanted to give you this. It's an investment for the gallery. No strings attached, no contracts, nothing that ties you to me. It's just an apology. A way of saying that I understand and that I'm sorry." Melissa took the envelope, feeling its weight. She didn't open it right away. She just looked at Edward and saw, for the first time, a man who was truly trying to be better. "Thank you, Edward. Really." "How are you?" he asked, looking at her belly. "I'm good, very good. And you?" He smiled, and it was a sad but genuine smile. "I'm trying. One day at a time." They stood there for a few more minutes, talking about small things, about the gallery, about the child to come, about the future. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was something different. It was forgiveness. It was release. When Edward left, Melissa felt something settle inside her. It wasn't complete happiness, not a fairy tale ending. It was peace. The peace of someone who did what needed to be done, who chose truth over convenience. The night continued beautifully. Art was sold, critics praised, artists cried with emotion seeing their creations valued, and Melissa, in the midst of that whirlwind of life and art, felt exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 months later, on a December morning, Melissa gave birth to a baby girl. The labor was difficult, but she held on, holding Ryan's hand, who was there not because he had to be, but because he chose to be. When she heard her daughter's first cry, Melissa cried too, but they were tears of pure joy. She named the girl Clara, a simple, beautiful name that meant light, and Clara was exactly that, a light that had come to illuminate a path that had been dark for so long. Edward visited the hospital the next day. He brought flowers, a gift for Clara, and stood there looking at his daughter with an emotion Melissa had never seen in him. He held the baby carefully, as if afraid of breaking her, and Melissa saw tears stream down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Thank you for bringing her into the world." Melissa nodded, feeling a strange tenderness for this man she had once loved, who had hurt her, but who was now trying to be better. Not for her, but for himself and for the daughter they shared. The months that followed were a period of adjustment, of sleepless nights, of diapers, of crying, of discoveries. The gallery continued to run, with Melissa managing everything from home, with Clara always nearby, sleeping in a bassinet, while her mother answered emails and organized exhibitions. Ryan remained present, not as a substitute father, but as a partner, a friend who slowly, very slowly, was becoming something more. They never rushed anything. They let things flow naturally, until one day, without realizing exactly when, they were a couple. Not on paper, not officially, but in their hearts, in their daily choices, in their mutual care. And Edward? Edward followed his own path. He continued with therapy, rebuilt his relationship with his own humanity, and became a present father to Clara. He didn't live with them, wasn't part of that family unit, but he was there, visiting every week, taking his daughter on outings, building a relationship based on respect and true love. 2 years after the separation, Edward sent Melissa a message. It was a photo of him with a woman, someone Melissa didn't know. The caption read, "I'm trying again. This time the right way. Thank you for teaching me what real love is." Melissa smiled as she read the message. She replied with a simple, "I'm happy for you, truly." And it was true. There was no resentment, no bitterness, just the certainty that they had both made the right, albeit painful, decisions. The gallery thrived. It became a landmark in New York, a space where marginalized artists found a voice, where forgotten stories were told, where art was not just aesthetics but resistance. Melissa received invitations for lectures, for interviews, for events, but she never lost her essence. She never went back to being that woman who performed to please. Clara grew up in an environment of real love, of truth, of honest choices. She saw her mother working with passion, saw her father visiting with affection, saw Ryan building wooden toys for her on weekends. It wasn't a traditional family, but it was a real one. One night, as she was putting Clara to sleep, Melissa looked out the apartment window and saw the city of New York glittering outside. She thought about everything she had been through, everything she had lost, everything she had gained, and she realized something fundamental. She had lost the luxury, the important last name, the social status. But she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself, and she finally learned that true love begins the day we stop accepting being invisible, the day we choose truth over convenience, the day we decide that being happy is more important than seeming happy. Melissa kissed Clara's forehead, turned off the bedroom light, and went to the living room where Ryan was waiting with a cup of tea. She sat next to him, rested her head on his shoulder, and sighed with pure contentment. "And you?" he asked. "How are you feeling?" Melissa smiled. "I'm at peace, Ryan. Finally, I'm at peace." And it was true. It wasn't a perfect ending, not a fairy tale. It was something better, it was real, it was hers, it was freedom. Dear listeners, we hope Melissa's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of courage, new beginnings and self-love, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Was it Melissa's decision to leave? Was it Edward's transformation? Was it Ryan's respectful love? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it's never too late to start over and that true love begins when we choose ourselves. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. Until then,